Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Monster Hunter Wilds talk. Today I've just got something a bit fun, a bit of a discussion that we're going to do in that classic tier list format. It's about the difficulty of the monsters, which in itself is kind of a relevant topic that we've spoke about in different videos. But if we had to really take a look at all the monsters of Wilds at the moment and order them in terms of difficulty, where would we place them? It's going to be a fun way for me to look back at the roster of Wilds and talk about some of my favorite fights and why. But also why certain things were more difficult or maybe less difficult than expected. Also, there will be two sections of this. There'll be the initial list, right, where we're just doing the general difficulty of the monster. Of course, we now really understand that tempered monsters are adding difficulty to the fight, more health, more damage. But also you have that difficulty star system, so if you've got a gore magala that's 3-star, it's noticeably weaker than a 5-star version. Going from a 3-star non-tempered gore magala to a 5-star tempered gore magala, some of those moves that hit you will now simply kill you. And so we're starting to see people like speedrunners actually putting the star difficulty of this run in the title, as they really should. There's more of an understanding and an awareness that maybe the fight where you're against a 3-star non-tempered or whatever was noticeably easier than the 5-star tempered. But having said all of that, it's still not the case that anything in the game is too extremely difficult right now, and we're hoping with the update 1, hopefully we'll have some proper difficulty around the corner. But now we begin from the start with the initial tier list, looking at the whole roster of the game. Starting with the hardest monster that exists, Chatacabra, the ultimate training dummy. Honestly, one of my favorite starting monsters we've ever had. Obviously is not difficult. Still, I think he's a great fight to introduce Wilds and a lot of the mechanics, and it's something about him. I just find him really appealing. I never have a bad time attacking him, which is a really weird sentence. Harder than him, but also in F tier, is definitely going to be Cumatrice. The fire chicken is also a really cool design. I love the visuals of the way that tail flows. Often, I do end up getting hit by the fire explosion because the timing's a bit unexpected. Not that it's a problem by any means. It's a very easy fight, but again, a really, really nice new starting monster. One that I don't have a problem killing. I gotta stop saying that. Also in F tier, then we have what I think is the most offensive of the three here. This is Lalabarina, which is a standout monster in terms of design, the layout of its really cool nest, the floret mechanic, the paralysis sphere, and its dancey nature. It's a really cool monster, but to actually fight it, it's quite bland. Honestly, you can completely ignore what it's doing and just blindly attack it at the front or the back. They're both going to be strangely good hit zones. And it's super easy to stagger and knock down with all the legs, opening a wound and popping those. Something about this fight just doesn't click. And I do hope if they bring it forward into some sort of arch-tempered version, or whether we get like a deviant, there's a big rebalancing in the way that it functions. Because right now, it's not just not a challenge, it's almost like a chore to chase this thing around and actually attack it. Upper tier then, we have D tier, where we have Congalala. It's nice to have the guy back. It's a cool, up-to-date new generation of Congalala. I like the way that it interacts with the environment around where you usually find it, and the multiple mushrooms that it eats to change its attacks. It even has a few strange attacks where even though you're in front of it, it'll do the fart at the back, leading to quite a lot of free DPS windows. It's not exactly ever expected to be the hardest monster, but it's definitely a pushover in its current state. Next up though, a new monster. We have Rompopolo. Another monster that I like in terms of its design and theme and where you fight it, the way that it explodes the environment around you, and obviously the super satisfying nature of deflating it at 3 different parts. But it's something about the nature of these smaller bipedal monsters that is just so easy to attack, flow around it. Every time it does something, you find yourself on its side or behind it, free DPS. It ends up getting knocked down, staggered, and basically exposed quite a lot. Even more so when you deflate it, and that gives you another option. I don't think there's a lot to be said about the 4 new monsters we've covered so far, all having difficulty issues, but the mechanics and design and theme and even the areas they're in is super cool. They just need that push with some sort of like different species or something. So we continue on with that theme, now with Balahara, also in D. Balahara, it never really gave me a hard time in the betas or anything, but I did think its mechanics were cool. I think the way that it telegraphs its attacks with the tail, or say the head, whether it's going to do shots or that stream attack, it's really well designed. The mechanics, the skeleton of this thing is fantastic. The way that it wraps around other monsters in turf wars, or the way it climbs along pillars that you end up shooting down or pulling down, leaving it exposed. It's another one of those fights that I'm like, yeah, this isn't that hard, but I always enjoy going against the thing. So it's hard to criticize, but in terms of difficulty, obviously not super difficult. Also in D tier then we have the new Hirabami. Another, I'm going to keep saying this, another really cool monster in design. I really like what it brings to the table, but it just isn't challenging. I will say props to the developers for actually letting us attack the thing. You know the way that it floats in the air? More than often than not, the tail is kind of hovering down towards the ground. It's reachable even with smaller melee weapons. Something that I always found annoying as hell is with aerial monsters of this kind, often they're in the air and out of range, being annoying, doing stuff you can't mess with. So it seems like they learned their lesson here in making sure that Hirabami is actually a fightable target for the weapons of the game. Go figure. Now, a monster that I do not think is cool, but is probably the hardest of this tier of monster, is Gypsyros. I like what's going on with this monster. Ultimately, you've got the flashing to deal with, right? But the extendo tail is quite funny and weird to deal with. The hardest part of this fight is probably when it just does the blind classic panic chicken run, where, you know, you're firing poison on side to side, and if it runs into you, that knocks you down. That used to be one of the most annoying attacks that I would deal with the old generation of monsters. They're just, I'm running forward and everything gets hit move. It'd probably be technically a harder fight if you weren't just immediately breaking the beak and dealing with the flash in that way very quickly. It's another one of those that's definitely not challenging, but still quite enjoyable as a fight. Alright, so now we move up a tier into C tier, where we have Blangonga. Another classic monster that kind of has the issue of just being a great target the whole time. No matter where you are around the monster, you're just hitting something that's reasonably good to hit. As long as you're aware of that familiar, like, backwards double kick and jump backwards thing that these monster types do. We're also able to deal with it, say, frost breath attacks very quick, getting out of that. Honestly, thanks to the new radio wheel where you got the optimal status cleanser tool. I suppose the only reason why it's slightly above the rest here in terms of difficulty is because it comes later in the game, right? In the iceshard cliffs. It's just like a higher tier monster. But it's also another one that I just wouldn't really describe as difficult. Much like, sadly, Nerzilla, who I put kind of around the same level. Old Nerzilla, I think, was a lot harder to deal with just because of the very restrictive movement and control of your character that we used to have. I remember fighting this thing in GU for the first time and just really relying on my charge blade and blocking a lot of its leaps and attacks, especially the big pincers with the huge range they have. Now we're able to kind of smoothly flow around the target, especially with focus mode staying on target. These days, it's just a lot easier to be moving around a monster to avoid what it's doing. I like the small design changes that happen with it, the bigger crystallization on its back, but it is another one of those monsters that just feels like it's hard to have a place that's bad to be at, whether you're the head, whether you're opening wound on the leg for a knockdown, or attacking the back and all those crystals. It's very easy to chain bully. Now here's one that surprised me, and I think maybe people will agree with me. Yen Cuckoo. I would have expected to be putting this in D tier. It's not exactly the most exciting thing that it's just above that in C. But I don't know about you guys, but when I first did that high rank unlock and went against the Yen Cuckoo in the big packs and everything, it was actually briefly scary in terms of the fact that it hit me multiple times in a row. I was like, whoa, I actually have to heal. Say that panic chicken run we talked about with Gypsyros, this thing's doing that but worse. You imagine a bunch of them doing it at once, you're getting hit. Something about this version just felt significantly more aggressive, like it would combo into the next attack faster and back to back. Again, it's not a fight that I would describe as difficult or overly hard, but something about this version was harder than I expected it to be, so I was actually quite impressed by it. Alright, next up we have Gravios in C tier. What they've done to this monster is really cool. I think it's awesome the way that it's colossal and scary and big. The beams and the different ways it uses that. The little moveset brought in from Basirius so it can poison you as well. By no means is this a bad fight. I actually like it a lot. But it's those new mechanics where you're opening up wounds that would give you a new punish window that you just wouldn't have with the older versions of this monster. You're able to obviously break parts multiple times in a row, and optimally you're at the head, you're at the belly, you're opening up the belly multiple times, fully exposing that juicy hit zone and getting in there. Once that's done, it feels like this monster is just on an infinite stagger loop. And because it's so large, you're able to nicely fit under the head into that belly zone without any difficulty at all, really. So I would rate this kind of like Chasacabra in that I find it a really satisfying dummy to attack, especially with its incredibly solid element hit zones, the best that we have in the game compared to most being bad. So it's just made for a really good element target dummy in the end. Finally, for C tier though, we have Rathian, which I'll actually put above Gravios. It's not exactly a hard fight. The backflips, the multiple combos, you gotta watch out for the poison because it will deal some nasty damage over time. You still got the fire shots. but it's such a familiar monster that I just know exactly what it's doing when and why. And the fact that in this game, we're able to have our weapon out and flash pod without sheathing the weapon, it absolutely destroys a flying monster like Rathian. Again, another kind of bipedal monster where you've got the legs that you can attack, wound, and then pop those. That's an immediate knockdown. And I end up fighting it a good amount because there's a lot of those great hunts like in the oilwell basin where it's something like new udra and Rathian or arkveld and Rathian quite often. Above these then we have in B tier to start with, the Ebony Odegron, the Guardian version. I was thrilled to see this monster with its reveal. I love Odegron so much. A lot of people, surprisingly, actually don't like the Ebony version compared to the regular red. That concept of it being a fighter, super agile, super small, surprisingly so as a monster, raking its targets and causing all that bleed that you got to deal with. Then you got the Ebony version that kind of really, not fully does away with that, but really pulls back on that really cool concept. Just though that it's got some extra dragon as part of its toolkit, it doesn't quite hit the same with him. Having said that, visually, I think the Ebony style is super cool. And you get some of the Guardian mechanics, say the extra explosions around it after certain attacks. For me, that actually kind of helped though, because it holds it in place and, you know, Odegron bounces around and flips around a lot. But if you actually get to hit it and combo on it, that's when staggers happen, that's when you really lock this monster down. Which feels easier to do because of its Guardian attacks in a way. Probably a little bit harder than that would be the other Guardian returning monster, Anjanath. Anjanath's a funny one because, you know, I'm so familiar with this fight. It's one of the best monsters in World, an awesome new addition back in 5th gen. And the Fulgur version, super cool with the lightning. It actually brings a lot to the table, rather than what we see with Ebony, kind of almost pulling back on the cool concept. Not to mention, with this Guardian version, you have the extra explosions around it. It adds another level to the mechanics. It is yet another monster held back in difficulty a little bit by the fact that we're creating wounds, focus striking them, that holds it in place, opens up free DPS windows, especially on the very exposed 2 legs, which will cause knockdowns. But between Odegron and Anjanath in this case, I have found Anjanath to be a bit harder, I suppose. Okay, next up, also in B tier, we have Zuwu. This is my favorite new monster of Wilds. The way that it generates these different weapons, whether it's flinging these ranged spikes at you, creating the curved scythe and going for that horrible grab attack where it munches on you. The way that it leaps away from you, exposes the horror underneath, and then charges you. One of the most satisfying offset things to do. The sounds that it makes. This is an eldritch horror that snuck into Monster Hunter. I think it's fantastic. And I'm saddened that it's in the place that it is in terms of difficulty. I want this to be a tier 3 monster so I can fight it more often. Again, one of my favorite monsters in the series in general. I think because it's smaller though, you have an easier time reaching the optimal hit zones or in general even evading its attacks. Compared to, say, Nuudra, which is also a cephalopod type, I'm not getting pressed against a wall or stuck in a bad spot nearly as much against this monster. So I'm actually quite hopeful for Zuwu in the future if they were to do like a deviant or a different variant of this monster to add some mechanics, add some difficulty. It's like a prime target, and if they were going to pick any monster for that, I'd hope they start with Zuwu. Also, kind of around the same level for me was a Jarakan. This one I wasn't actually expecting to have any difficulty with, but the first time I fought it, I actually did have a hard time with it. Not necessarily, oh, I'm carting it anyway, but just its attacks would catch me off guard. The timings on them, the following explosions, the way that it kind of lumbers around and then charges forward. It's just one of those monsters that I had to learn to get comfortable with, and I wasn't expecting, say, the shell to be such a satisfying target, so you gotta get back and around it. I do think it's a very cool design. I do think it's got a lot of cool mechanics. You just kind of have to learn them, and then quickly it becomes a comfortable fight. But I would have expected to be putting a Jarakan like C tier or something like that in terms of difficulty when it was first revealed. So it's done pretty well, all things considered. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the B tier. We got 2 more monsters. And what I'm going to do here is put Deshagama and its Guardian version pretty much in the same tier. It's been surprisingly difficult as a monster during the betas. I think some of those big lumbering attacks, the shockwave, earth cracks, you know, when it does the multi-combo, then turns around and then, hey, the combo's not done. Now comes the scariest part. It can be pretty dangerous. Something about this big bear is always fun to fight though. And then you got the Guardian version that also has the explosions after certain attacks. You got to give it a little bit more respect there too. I would say the Guardian version's ever so slightly more difficult because of that. But you know, when we think about the whole pack or herd mechanic, this was the big alpha monster that they showed quite a lot of. They ended up not really doing much with that mechanic at all. It's only Deshagama that remains an alpha and you actually see the other ones with it sometimes. If you were forced to engage with the pack every single time, it would be a lot harder. They get in the way, they cover the camera, and he can do some nasty damage given the chance. So I do think there's potential for this monster if they at some point lean into that herd or pack mechanic a bit more. But now we're getting to the last few monsters. The last B tier monster I have for you is the first Apex. Duna. I don't know, something about this fight just wasn't that difficult for me. I think it's got those great hit zones with the fins that expose it. I think the big slams are cool and all, but incredibly easy to guard or perfect guard, if not perfect iframe. Something about its slower nature just feels very easy to manage, at least for me. It's the one that I'm least interested by mechanically, visually, and all that, but I don't think it's a bad monster. I think it's fine, but man am I glad that they didn't pick Duna as the first arch-tempered. I would have been disappointed. Now, what I'm going to do here as we move into A tier is something maybe unexpected, which is Xochitl in A tier. The reason for this is because, you only get to do the fight one time. All the mechanics are thrown at you for the first time. There's a lot going on, but it's also very forgiving because it's low rank. So all those cool mechanics just aren't really hitting that hard. It's the familiar stuff where you see certain attacks like the fire breath into the ground and you're like, whoa, I'm facing Fatalis all of a sudden. It makes you take the fight a lot more seriously because that's obviously a fight of the past that's been very difficult. I think there was a lot going on in the fight in general and a lot of mechanics that are going to be very important to understand and actually deal with a proper high rank version of this monster. So while the low rank version was by no means difficult, there was a lot of potential there that we know is right around the corner coming in Title Update 1. So it's almost like a nod to what's coming that I put it in A tier. Maybe I'd feel different about it if I actually got it to fight it multiple times and actually see how the mechanics truly worked and also how easy it was. Right, also in A tier, surprisingly enjoyable was both versions of Rathalos, normal or Guardian. Guardian adds a couple explosions from the downward slams, which actually opens up a weak point if you can get out of the explosion in time. But something about the King of the Skies, man. They have really improved this fight over the last few generations. I remember in Rise fighting this Rathalos for the first time being like, whoa, those fire shots and drags from the air, seriously dangerous, really cool. It's an aerial fight where the monster's really in the air quite a lot, but it comes down and gives you plenty of opportunities to attack as well. It's so much harder and more interesting than the Rathian fight by comparison. I think they've absolutely smashed it out the park. I've heard a lot of talk about how this feels so much better than, say, the World version, but to me, this just feels like a slightly different Rise version where it was already so good there. And I can't really rate the normal or Guardian version too much harder or easier than the other. Both A tier for me. Alright, time to get controversial, I suppose. In A tier, just after Rathalos, I've got Raidao. Raidao is one of my favorite monsters in the series by far, one of the best fights in Wilds, and I'm so glad that it made it the prime target of the initial beta. Something about this design, the flow of the fight, the way that he does the flips and slams with the wings, the crystalline armor that becomes great hit zones, the sounds that it makes, the way the horns work and the way they telegraph the lightning beams, the multiple kinds of lightning beams. This easily could have been the flagship of the game and it would have been phenomenal. It feels like we got two in one game because of Raidao. So I absolutely love this fight and I'd probably rate it harder than I do now if I hadn't fought it a ton of times in the beta in a load of random gear in a weakened state. So I'm really looking forward to the arch-tempered version. What a great pick for them to go with to start with. Slightly harder than that then for me has been New Udra, just in terms of thinking about tempered and 5-star and everything. Occasionally I get lazy. I go for the Switch Axe Hyper Armor or something. I take a hit. I'm like, whoa, that was 70% of my health. And now I'm burning to death while I'm doing this long full release animation or whatever. It's one of the few things that has actually carted me in multiplayer hunts when I'm being lazy. But God, is it a satisfying and fun fight. Super cool mechanically. I think it's big enough to actually get you stuck between the different tendrils when you're going for those weak zones or whatever. The way that, you can be behind it and then it's attacking you like it's in front of you just because it's a cephalopod. Super clever and super cool. And I think it's going to be a pretty scary one when they introduce Arch-Tempered. About the same level, I would say, is Jin Dahaad. I actually find the mechanics of this fight very straightforward. Obviously, it's a big, lumbering monster, and so the attacks are very easy to see coming and telegraphed. Maybe it's fair to say that this fight is noticeably easier if you have a guard, because a lot of those ice explosions, the breath, or the ones that it does like emanating from its chest, you can just guard and deal with. If you have a perfect counter, that's also pretty decent with, say, Switch Axe. Whereas other weapons, you really got to get out of there. If we're talking 5-star and tempered, some of those attacks are going to absolutely destroy you, let alone the super, which will just end you. I wouldn't describe the fight currently as overly hard though. Pretty much you just knock it and go to the big glowing red zones and break them down. And it quite often does that whole climb the wall or go up onto something up high, leaving itself very exposed, letting you just do some free sharpening and prepping and rebuffing, then pull it down for a free DPS window. A lot of those mechanics essentially backfire on it. But we have been seeing stories on Reddit and such with the 5-star tempered version one-shotting people, where, you know, I'm not really seeing the same issues with new Udra or Raidao, so I guess I put it at the top of A. But now we finally reach S tier, where I can't really put any monster in this game as, oh, that was difficult, that was a really tough fight. But in the context of the rest of the list, these two are obviously the hardest. Starting with Arkveld, the flagship of the game. This is one of my favorite fights to just repeatedly do. Obviously they want us to repeatedly do it. They made it have better rewards than everything else in its tempered version. And yeah, in 5-star form, it can be pretty scary. It does have multiple wombo combos that if you do get hit by multiple parts of it, you will just go down. But there's something very forgiving about the way that the chains slam down, giving you a really nice hit zone, even if you're far away from the monster. But leaning into the aggression of Arkveld so that you're staying in front of it, as it chain slams, you stay in front of the head, you dodge in rather than out, is very rewarded. I do think the fact that we fought this monster a lot in the beta too had a huge influence on our experience with this going in and first experiencing it during the story and such, which has probably made it feel easier than otherwise since we already had experience with it. Then you got the help of gear sets and such to make it even easier, but overall I do rate the fight very high. One of my favorites in the series in general. It kind of reminds me to Nergigante in that I would just love to fight this monster over and over. Something about it, it's just so satisfying to fight. So they've done a great job with it, and it's obviously one of the harder things in the game. But at this point, I actually rate Gore Magala as a harder fight. When you got the 5-star tempered actually being really aggressive against you, it can be really scary. Not to mention that really irritating fade mechanic that they've got, where when you're under this monster, which is often where you want to be to avoid attacks and maintain DPS, it fades out of existence. It like goes like see-through or fully invisible. And then you end up getting hit because you can't see the thing. The whole frenzy thing's not really a concern. We're all using antivirus for most meta sets anyway. But I would say the wide-reaching, explosive nature of those frenzy blasts from the mouth, especially the one that it does sideways and drags in front of itself, you really got to get under the body to avoid that, or guard a perfect evader or something. I would say its aggressive nature and the multiple combos that it does lead to surprising carts for people, as one of the few, if not the only, generally harder thing that exists in this game. Between Arkveld and Gore, I would say Gore is proving to be slightly harder, but again, that could be, say, all the experience we have with Arkveld now, but I fought Gore quite a lot in Rise. But yeah, I would say the thing that I hunt the most in this game is Gore Magala and Arkveld, and I also rate them as the hardest things in the game, if we had to pick. So that's the list. Let's now run down the monsters in tempered 5-star version, the top 6. So here it is, as we've obviously talked about. Duna being the easiest of the lot of them, but having some scariness to her slams in tempered 5-star, she could really clean out most of your health with those. Raidao, Udra, and of course dahaad, all of them have the potential to kind of one-shot you, catch you out. It's the beam explosions that could catch you out, maybe especially in multiplayer if it suddenly targets you with Raidao. Or like I said, getting caught between the tentacles with Udra. If you have fire ticking you and you've taken a hit, you're laying there and your health's evaporating, that could be a scary time. Like I said as well with dahaad, he is one-shotting people, not just with his supers, but say the chest frost engine that comes out, or the blast from its mouth into itself, AoEing around itself. If you don't have a guard for that, that can be very deadly. Tempered Arkveld in 5-star always has that potential to catch you out with a nasty chain slam or combo. Mainly for me, it's just like mistiming a perfect evade or something and getting hit suddenly in a surprising way. But even then, usually it's okay. Worst of the lot is probably Gore, with his aggressive nature, multi-hit combos that are doing significantly more damage than most other monsters in the game. But yeah, it's just organized like that, so you can take a look and see what you think. So, what do you guys think? Would you reorganize this list in any way compared to me? What are you hoping for in future updates in terms of difficulty? And who out of the monsters that we have would you choose to make arch tempered first, or maybe give like a subspecies or deviant to? Like what I was saying with Zuwu, I'd want that to be the first one. But yeah, just a fun talk and list today. Until next time then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.